The day Eli Merritt walked out of Hargrove House for the last time, he didn't look back. Not because he wasn't scared, because he was. And he'd learned a long time ago that looking back only made the scared thing bigger. He was 18 years old. Everything he owned was in a backpack that had belonged to someone else first. 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans with a tear at the left knee he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months, a library card that technically expired in April, and $47 and some change in a zippered pocket that had a broken zipper. That was it. That was the whole inventory of Eli Merritt's life on the morning of June 3rd. He stood on the sidewalk outside Hargrove House and breathed in the Savannah air. Thick, green, heavy with the smell of the river 2 blocks west, and the magnolias that lined the street like they'd been there since before anyone thought to name the street anything. Beautiful city. Savannah. Didn't feel that way when you were 6 and terrified and being dropped off at the front door by a woman who said she'd come back. She didn't come back, but the magnolias were still beautiful. Even then, even now. Eli adjusted the backpack on his shoulder and started walking. The apartment was on Hartwell Lane, 2nd floor, above a dry cleaning shop that had been there since 1971, according to the hand-painted sign above the door, and smelled like it. Chemical, warm, a little like the inside of a very old coat. $420 a month, which was almost exactly what Eli made working dinner service at Magnolia Table on Broughton Street. Which meant groceries were a negotiation. Which meant breakfast was usually bread. Which meant every morning, without fail, without thinking about it twice. Eli gave Birch the bigger half. Birch was 10 years old. He had hair that no comb had ever truly conquered. Brown, wild, sticking up in the back no matter what Eli did, and he'd tried conditioner once, which had been a mistake on every level. He had eyes too big for his face, not in a cute way, in the way that happens to kids who've learned early that adults say one thing and mean another, and you'd better be watching closely if you want any warning at all. He'd been in the system for 2 years. 7 placements in 24 months. The file said behavioral issues, said history of aggression, said placement disruptions. What the file didn't say, what no file ever said, because no file ever did, was that every single one of those placements had ended because a grown adult had made a promise and broken it, and Birch had eventually stopped being quiet about it, which they called aggression, which Eli called something else entirely. He didn't say that to the caseworker, obviously. He said it internally, at length, but what he actually told the court was simpler. He said, "I know what it's like to be that kid, and I'm not going anywhere." Provisional guardianship, temporary on paper. A trial run, the caseworker said, like Birch was a car you took around the block before deciding. Eli didn't say that out loud either. He said thank you. He signed the papers. He brought Birch home to the apartment above the dry cleaner, and the first morning he cut the bread in half, slid the bigger piece across the table, and said, "Eat. You've got school." Birch looked at the bread, looked at Eli. "You already ate?" "Yeah." A pause, long enough. "Okay." And he ate. He didn't ask again after that, but he noticed. Eli could tell, because Birch noticed everything that was the whole thing about Birch. He was a 10-year-old with the observational skills of a much-used person, and he missed nothing. He just chose for reasons of his own not to push. That was fine. That was more than fine. They understood each other without having to say it, which was, Eli had come to believe, the closest thing to a definition of home he'd ever found. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white envelope. Official looking. Return address from something called Thayer and Associates, 44 Drayton Street, Savannah, Georgia. Eli looked at it for a long time at the kitchen table. Birch looked at Eli, looking at it. "You gonna open it?" "Yeah." "When?" "Give me a second. It's been like a minute." "Birch." "I'm just saying." Eli opened the letter. It was an invitation. That was the word they used. Invitation. Like it was something pleasant. Like it was a birthday party. You are hereby invited to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Gertrude May Calloway at the offices of Thayer and Associates. Gertrude Calloway. Eli said the name out loud. Quietly. Nothing. No recognition. No memory. No tug of anything familiar. He'd never heard that name in his life. But the letter had his full name on it, his address, his date of birth, and it said your presence is required in that particular way. Legal letters said things which meant it wasn't really an invitation, which meant he didn't really have a choice. He read it again. Gertrude Calloway, founder of something called Calloway Press, which sounded like a printing company, which sounded like absolutely nothing to do with him. He put the letter down. "What is it?" Birch said. "Someone died." "Who?" "I don't know." "Then why?" "I don't know, Birch." Birch looked at the letter, looked at Eli, decided correctly that this was a moment to not push. "You want the rest of my bread?" Eli almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Gertrude Calloway. He looked her up that night on his phone. Cracked screen. Slow Wi-Fi. The page had to load twice. She had been 78 years old. White-haired. Small in photographs. She had the quality of someone who had been formidable once and then settled into something quieter and more permanent. Like a tree that had stopped growing but had absolutely no intention of being moved. She'd founded Calloway Press in 1974. Started with one community newspaper, grew it to 4 covering Savannah and 2 neighboring counties, regional news, local stories, the journalism that covered school board meetings and county fairs, and the obituaries of people who had never been famous but had mattered to the people around them. She died 3 weeks ago. Quietly, the article said. At home, she had one surviving family member listed, a nephew, Preston Calloway. Eli read that twice. Nephew. Not son. Not daughter. Nephew. And then he found his own name in a legal letter from the woman's estate, which made no sense, which was going to keep him up tonight, which it did. The offices of Thayer and Associates were on Drayton Street in a building that had probably been a house first. Old brick, high ceilings, rooms that had been waiting patiently for 200 years and had gotten very good at it. Eli wore the nicest thing he owned, which was a gray button-down that Birch had decided helpfully to iron that morning. Birch had never ironed anything in his life. The result was a shirt that was mostly wrinkle-free except for a diagonal crease across the left shoulder that looked like it had been put there on purpose by someone who really committed to a bad decision. He wore it anyway. He walked in. The room was full of people who knew exactly why they were there. Eli was not one of those people. A long table, dark wood. The surface had absorbed 100 years of serious conversation and smelled faintly of furniture polish and old decisions. Legal pads and glasses of water sat in front of each chair, which felt formal in a way that made Eli's hands want to do something useful, and there was nothing for them to do. He sat at the end, the far end, chairs closest to the door. Old habit. Always know where the exit is. At the head of the table sat a man who carried the room without trying. 62, maybe 63. Silver at the temples. A vest that fit like it had been made for him, which it probably had. Gold ring on the right hand. A jaw like something carved deliberately. Eyes that moved through the room the way powerful people's eyes did, deciding immediately what everything was worth and what it wasn't. Preston Calloway. Eli knew it without being told. The shape of a man who owned the room and knew it, and was fine with you knowing it too. Beside him sat a woman, 59 or 60. Silver hair pulled back cleanly. Good posture. Pearls at her throat that didn't look like jewelry so much as armor. She was looking at her hands, which were folded on the table, and not looking at anything else. And at the far end, a man Eli hadn't noticed at first, because he was the sort of man you didn't notice until you did, and then you understood immediately that you'd been wrong not to. Edmund Thayer, 67, maybe older, gray suit, still eyes, a face that had seen a great deal and decided to hold most of it in reserve. He was looking at Eli the way people looked at you when they'd been waiting a long time and weren't going to say so. Eli sat down. The reading began. Thayer read it all in a voice like water over gravel, steady, unhurried. Each clause landed and settled before he moved to the next. The newspaper holdings went to a charitable media trust with conditions Eli didn't fully follow. Real estate in 2 counties. Personal effects to be distributed. A scholarship fund for journalism students at Savannah State. A donation to the Historic Preservation Society. A specific bequest to the dry cleaner on Forsyth, who had cleaned her husband's suits for 30 years and never once charged extra for rush service. Eli sat and listened and understood that none of this had anything to do with him. Until the last one. Thayer turned a page, looked up briefly, then back down. To Eli Merritt, he read. Of 14 Hartwell Lane, Savannah, Mrs. Calloway bequeaths the sum of $1. The room went very quiet. Then Preston Calloway made a sound. Not a laugh exactly. Not quite. More like the sound a man made when he was too polished to laugh openly, but too amused to stay completely silent. A small exhale, a private smile directed at the table in front of him. The old dear, he said to no one in particular. Warm, fond, dismissive in that careful way that was worse than being openly dismissive. Always had a sense of theater at the end. Somebody coughed. Somebody else shifted in their chair. Thayer slid the envelope down the table. Eli caught it. Small, plain. His name on the front in handwriting that was old but precise. The marks of someone who had once been careful and stayed careful all the way to the end. He opened it. Inside a $1 bill. Old. Worn. The creases soft from years of folding. A bill that had changed hands 100 times and remembered all of them. Eli looked at it. And then he saw it. Bottom right corner. Pencil. Faint. Small marks written on purpose by someone who understood that some things needed to be hidden in plain sight. West Storage. The Double Oak. Thayer will take you. 4 words per line. Maybe 9 words total. He read it twice. He looked up. Preston was already talking to someone beside him, easy and low. The woman Sylvia was still looking at her hands. Thayer was closing his folder with the efficiency of a man who had just done exactly what he came to do. No one was watching Eli. He folded the dollar bill in half. Then again, tucked it into the front pocket of his shirt right over his heart. Stood up. Thank you for your time, he said. His voice didn't shake. He made sure of that. And he walked out. He made it 2 blocks before he stopped. Leaned against an iron fence bordering a small park and just stood there. Savannah was full of these small parks with old trees and iron fences and benches that had been sitting long enough to be comfortable about it. He let the thick green air settle over him. West Storage. The Double Oak. Thayer will take you. Okay. So, a dead woman he'd never met had left him $1 with a hidden message. That was a sentence that existed in the world now. He pressed his hand flat against his shirt, against the folded bill in his pocket. A dead woman he'd never met knew his name, his address, his date of birth. A dead woman he'd never met had written him a message she'd hidden where only he would find it, which meant she'd planned it, which meant she'd thought about him specifically, which meant there was something underneath all of this he did not yet understand. Eli breathed in the magnolia air. Okay, he thought. Okay. He started walking again. He needed to pick up Birch by 3. He had questions, a lot of questions, but he had a kid to pick up first. Birch took one look at him when he walked through the school gate and said, "What happened?" "I'll tell you later." "That bad?" "Not bad, just complicated." "Did someone yell at you?" "No." "Did you yell at someone?" "Birch." "You looked like you wanted to." "I always look like I want to yell at someone that's just my face." "Truer," Birch said, which was fair. They walked home in the afternoon heat. Savannah, June. The warmth that settled on your shoulders like something physical. The river smell came and went on the breeze. Eli didn't say anything about the dollar or the message or the handwriting. Not yet. He held it inside his chest like the bill itself. Folded. Careful. He was still sitting at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock when the knock came. 3 knocks. Measured. Patient. The knock of someone who knew it was expected. Eli opened the door. Edmund Thayer stood in the hallway in a different suit from this afternoon, but the same still eyes, same calm, same quality of a man who had been in a hurry once and had finished with all of that. "Mr. Merritt," he said. "I figured you'd come tonight," Eli said. "Did you?" "She planned this carefully. You planned carefully. Tonight made sense." Thayer almost smiled. "May I come in?" Eli stepped back. Thayer came inside, looked at the room the way he'd looked at Eli at the table today, not assessing, recording. A man who intended to remember what he saw, the small kitchen, the second-hand table, the 2 chairs, one with a cracked leg that Eli had fixed with a hardware store bolt, the half loaf of bread on the counter, the light that hummed slightly when it was cold. He looked at all of it. His face didn't change. "She's not a stranger," Thayer said. "Mrs. Calloway." "I figured that too." "Sit down, son." "Don't call me that." A pause. "My apologies," Thayer said. And he meant it. You could tell when a man meant something and when he was just performing the shape of it, and Thayer meant it. Eli sat down. Thayer sat across from him, folded his hands on the table, looked at Eli steadily in the way of someone about to say something that required a foundation first, and the foundation required care. "Gertrude Calloway," Thayer said, "was your grandmother." The apartment was very quiet. From downstairs, faintly, the dry cleaner's exhaust fan hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. Birch was asleep in the back room. Eli could hear the particular quality of silence that meant someone was sleeping just on the other side of a thin wall. "My grandmother," Eli said. "Yes." "I don't have a grandmother." "You did. You do. She died 3 weeks ago." "I don't have family." "Mr. Merritt, I have spent 18 years in this system." Eli's voice stayed flat. Level. It cost him something to keep it that way. "I have a file with almost nothing in it. I have a last name the state gave me. I have—" He stopped. Started again. "I don't have family. I have never had family. So if this is a story you're about to tell me—" "Your father's name was Daniel," Thayer said, and that was the word that stopped everything. Daniel. Eli's father's name in the file was listed as unknown. That was the word. Unknown. Like a weather event. Like a category of thing rather than a person. "Daniel Merritt," Thayer continued, quietly, without rushing it. "He took his mother's last name because he never knew his father. He was Gertrude's son, her only child, born in 1971, before she was married, before she was anything yet. She was 22 years old and alone, and she made a choice she spent the rest of her life trying to understand." Eli looked at the table. "She kept him at first," Thayer said. "For 2 years she kept him, and then she married a man who didn't know about Daniel, and Daniel went into the system, and Gertrude spent the next 30 years building a newspaper and writing in her journals about a son she'd given up and could not stop loving." A breath. "Your father grew up the same way you did. He aged out of the system at 18. He met your mother shortly after. When you were 2 years old, he died. And your mother," Thayer paused, "was not able to care for you, and you went into the system. And Gertrude found out when you were 4 years old, and she tried to reach you." Eli looked up. "She tried," Thayer repeated. "Letters, calls to the agency, a lawyer's inquiry, a visit to the group home you were placed at in 2012, 7 separate attempts over 14 years, and she was turned away or ignored or given information that simply—" He stopped. "Simply what?" Eli said. Was wrong, Thayer said. Deliberately wrong. The room was still. Thayer's voice stayed even. Professional. But something moved behind his eyes that was not professional at all. Preston Calloway, he said, has managed Mrs. Calloway's personal affairs for the last 12 years. Since she became ill, he had full access to her correspondence, her legal communications, her medical records. He blocked her, Eli said. Not a question. Thayer nodded. Once. We believe every attempt she made to contact you or to locate you through official channels was intercepted. Letters returned to sender with incorrect forwarding addresses. Agency inquiries answered on Calloway letterhead, saying she had withdrawn her interest. The visit in 2012 to Linden House, where you were placed, the home director received a call from the Calloway family office an hour before she arrived, and by the time she got there, she was told the placement records were sealed. Eli sat very still. 18 years. 18 years of one room after another, of learning to read which adults would stay and which wouldn't, of being the kid nobody counted, of sitting in waiting rooms and donation lines and classrooms where the teacher already had your file and had already decided something about you before you sat down. 18 years of believing. Nobody. Nobody left. Nobody out there. Just him. And the whole time, an old woman in a house in Savannah had been trying to get to him. Eli pressed his hands flat against the table. He breathed. He was not going to cry in front of this man. He'd made a decision about that somewhere around age 9, and he'd held it since. Preston didn't want a grandchild in the picture, he said. Preston didn't want a legitimate heir, Thayer said. Mrs. Calloway's will, the real one, makes provision for you as trustee of Calloway Press. If you exist, if you're found, if you're in the picture. The real one, Eli said. The document read today was not the document Mrs. Calloway signed in my office 14 months ago. The air changed in the room. Something shifted. Quietly. The way something shifts when you realize the floor under you is not what you thought it was. He changed the will, Eli said. We believe the document substitution occurred approximately 8 weeks before Mrs. Calloway's death, when she was ill enough that she could not have verified the content in detail, when her signature could be reproduced under circumstances that would be at minimum difficult to contest. Eli looked at his hands, thought about Birch asleep in the back room, thought about a dollar bill in his shirt pocket. What happens now? He said. Thayer reached into his jacket, produced a small envelope of his own, placed it on the table. Mrs. Calloway was very specific about the order, he said. She knew this might happen. She had known Preston for 30 years, and she understood him. This envelope contains her letter to you. She asked me to give it to you before anything else, before the rest. Eli looked at the envelope, his name on the front, same handwriting as the dollar bill. Old and careful and precise. He didn't pick it up yet. And after the letter, he said, What's the rest? There is a property, Thayer said. A small farm west of the city. Mrs. Calloway held it under a separate private arrangement that has nothing to do with the estate Preston currently controls. He doesn't know it exists. A hidden property. She called it the West Place. She went there to think, to write. She kept things there she didn't want anyone else to see. Things like what? Things like the real will, Thayer said. A signed copy witnessed by 2 individuals who are still living, and 14 years of personal journals documenting in her own handwriting every attempt she made to contact you, every step Preston took to prevent it, and every detail of Calloway Press that she intended you to know. Eli was quiet. She also left a deadline, Thayer said. There's always a deadline. 30 days. The fraudulent document enters final probate in 30 days. Once it's certified, once the court accepts it as valid, reversing it becomes exponentially more difficult. Not impossible, but the kind of difficult that takes years and costs money, neither of us has. 30 days, Eli said. 30 days. Eli picked up the envelope, held it, put it back down. "Tonight," he said. "That's your choice." "I need to think." "Of course. And I need to tell you something first." Eli looked at Thayer steadily. "If this is a play, if there's something in this for you or for someone else, and this story you just told me is the mechanism I'm walking away, I've been in enough situations where someone had a very good reason for me to trust them that turned out to be a reason for them, not for me." "That's a reasonable thing to say," Thayer said. "I'm not done." Thayer waited. "There is a 10-year-old kid asleep in that room. He's my responsibility. Whatever happens in the next 30 days, he's the non-negotiable part. Whatever this is about, whatever she left, whatever you need from me, that kid stays safe and he stays with me, or I'm out. Those are the terms." A pause. Thayer looked at him for a moment, in a way that Eli couldn't quite read. And then something shifted in the old lawyer's face. Small. Not quite a smile, but the shape of something that had been closed for a long time and was opening slightly. "Mrs. Calloway," Thayer said quietly, "would have liked you very much." "Did you know her well?" "For 40 years. A pause. "She was the best person I've known. That's not sentiment. That's an accounting." Eli picked up the envelope again, set it back down. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll go tomorrow. Birch needs to get to school first." "Of course. 8:30 drop-off. I'll meet you after." Thayer stood, straightened his jacket, moved toward the door with the unhurried certainty of a man who had accomplished exactly what he came to do. At the doorway, he stopped. "Mr. Merritt." Eli looked at him. "She knew about you since you were 4 years old," Thayer said. "She never stopped. Not once. Not for a day. I want you to know that before you read the letter, whatever else you feel when you read it. She never stopped." He left. The door closed quietly. The exhaust fan hummed downstairs. Eli sat alone at the kitchen table with an envelope in front of him and his hand pressed flat against the dollar bill in his pocket. He sat there for a long time. He didn't open the letter that night. He tried twice, got the flap halfway lifted, put it back down. Not yet. He went to bed, didn't sleep much, lay in the dark and listened to Savannah settle around him. The city did this. Late at night it went quiet in a specific way, like something old and large and patient was breathing under all the brick and the moss. He thought about a woman named Gertrude, who was 78 years old when she died, who had founded a newspaper, who had written in her journals for 14 years about him. He thought about a man named Daniel Merritt, who had aged out of the same system Eli was aging out of now, who had met someone, who had a son, who died. He thought about how thin the line was, between existing in somebody's story and simply not existing in it, how close it was, all the time, how close. He was almost asleep when he heard it, a small sound from the other room. He lay still, then padding feet, the particular sound of Birch moving through the dark, the creak of the bad floorboard by the fridge, the sound of the cupboard, then the sound of bread being cut. Eli didn't move. A pause, a longer pause, then Birch's footsteps coming to his doorway. "Eli?" "Yeah." "You awake?" "Yeah." A beat. "I made you the bigger half." Eli stared at the ceiling. Something in his chest did something complicated. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." A pause. "You looked like you needed it." Another pause. "Go back to bed, Birch." "Okay." Footsteps retreating. The creak of the bad floorboard. Silence. Eli lay in the dark, pressed his hand over his heart, thought, "I know what it's like to be that kid, and I'm not going anywhere." The morning was gray, soft, a Savannah summer morning that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to be hot or bearable. Eli walked Birch to school, 6 blocks, past the iron fences and the moss-draped oaks, and the house on the corner with the purple front door that always made Birch point at it every single morning and say something about the color. "It's good purple," Birch said. "It's a very specific purple," Eli agreed. "Like if someone was confident about purple." "That's exactly what it is." Birch shouldered his backpack at the gate, looked at Eli the way he did sometimes when he sensed something happening that nobody was telling him about. "You'll be back at 3 o'clock, I promise." "Where are you going?" "I'll tell you tonight." "That's not reassuring." "I know. 3 o'clock, Birch." Birch looked at him one more second, then turned and walked through the gate without looking back. Eli watched until the kid was inside, until the door closed, until there was nothing left to watch. He breathed. Then he turned and walked to meet Thayer. The drive west was quiet. Thayer drove, said almost nothing. Eli sat in the passenger seat with the letter in his jacket pocket, the dollar bill against his heart, and the stillness of a person waiting for something that has already started. The city thinned. Neighborhoods gave way to low marshland. Then the land rose slightly, and the trees came in. Pine and live oak. Spanish moss like gray silk draped through every branch. Georgia green, the specific green of this part of the world, which was saturated and ancient and indifferent to everything that happened beneath it. The road narrowed, then narrowed again, and there at the end of a gravel drive, marked by nothing except two trees that had grown so close together for so long that their trunks had fused into one, the double oak exactly as the dollar bill had promised, sat the house, small, wooden, white paint that had done its best and was peacefully tired now, a porch running the full width of the front, a garden that had gone its own direction since no one had tended it, which had not in Eli's view made it worse, wildflowers through the old flower beds, honeysuckle over the porch rail, a house where someone had been happy, not dramatically, the quiet kind, the private kind that doesn't need witnesses. Eli got out of the car, stood in the gravel, listened to the sound of this place, which was birds and wind, and very little else. "She came here to write," Thayer said from beside him. "Every June, sometimes October. She said Savannah got loud when she needed to think, and this was where the noise stopped. She came alone. Always." Eli looked at the double oak. Two trees grown so long together that you couldn't tell anymore where one ended and the other began. No seam, no boundary, just one thing that used to be two. He thought about that more than made immediate sense. Then he followed Thayer up the porch steps and into the house. The west storage was exactly what it said it was. A small room off the back hallway, a wooden door that stuck, inside shelves, old paint cans, garden tools, the smell of dried earth and turpentine and thyme. And at the back of the room on a shelf at eye level a metal lockbox, not large, the size of a shoebox, older looking than everything else in the room, which was saying something, a simple key lock. Thayer handed Eli the key. Old metal, slightly warm from the lawyer's pocket. Eli fitted in, turned it. The click was small and definitive, the sound of something releasing that had been held shut a long time. He opened the lid. Inside, neatly arranged, 2 stacks of composition books, the black and white speckled kind you bought at drugstores. 14 of them. Eli counted without meaning to. The handwriting on the first one's cover said nothing except a year, 2010. Under the notebooks, a single manila envelope, sealed with red wax, his name on the front. Same handwriting, same careful precision. Below the envelope, a folded document, legal paper, notarized with 2 red stamps. Eli unfolded it. He could read enough of the legal language to understand the shape of it. A will, a real one, signed by Gertrude May Calloway on April 18th of the previous year in the presence of 2 named witnesses executed and witnessed and notarized. The words were different from what Thayer had read in that conference room. The dispositions were different, and near the bottom in language Eli had to read 3 times. To Eli Merritt, my grandson, I leave the trusteeship of Callaway Press Community Media Trust to be held and managed in accordance with the terms set out in Schedule A." He stopped reading. He needed a moment. Just a moment. He breathed. In. Out. The smell of the storage room, old earth, turpentine, the weight of the notebooks in their 2 stacks, 14 notebooks, 14 years. He picked up the first one, opened it. January 4th, 2010. Her handwriting, which he recognized now. Careful, small, precise. "I went to the agency again today. They told me the records were sealed, and I had no legal standing as a relative. I explained that I was his paternal grandmother. The woman at the desk was not unkind, but she was very firm. "I will try the other avenue," Thayer suggested. "I will not stop. He would be 9 years old now." Eli closed the notebook, set it down, picked up the manila envelope, broke the wax seal, unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was shakier here. Later in her life, the letter slightly larger as vision required, but still careful, still her. He read, "Eli, if you are reading this, then Thayer did his job and I am gone, and we have run out of time to meet. I am sorry for that. I want you to understand that I am sorry for that specifically. Not in general, not as a gesture. I am sorry that I will never know what your voice sounds like, and I am sorry that you will only ever know me through the words of an old woman in a storage room. I'm going to tell you the truth, all of it. You deserve that more than you deserve comfort. Your father Daniel was the best thing I ever did, and the thing I was most afraid of. I was 22 and alone, and I made a choice that I have never once, not for a single day, stopped thinking about. I told myself I was giving him a better life. I was. I was also giving myself a way to continue. Both of those were true. I have spent a long time learning to hold 2 true things at once. He grew up the way you grew up. He aged out the way you are aging out. He was by all accounts I was ever able to collect a good man. Patient. Funny in the quiet way. The kind of person who made other people feel steadied just by being in the room. I heard this from 3 separate people who knew him. I have no way to verify it, and I believe every word. He met your mother in the fall of 1997. You were born in January of 2000. He died in November of that same year. I did not find any of this out until 2006 when I hired a private investigator who found what the agencies had not been able to find or had not tried. By the time I knew you had been in the system for 4 years, I tried to find you. I need you to know that I tried. What I need you to also know, what I should have known sooner and did not, is that I trusted the wrong person with too much of my life for too long. I gave Preston authority because he was family, and because I was tired, and because it is easier when you are old and ill to let someone else handle the things that need handling. It is the most expensive mistake I ever made. I am asking you to do something. I know I have no right to ask. I know that. But I'm asking anyway because there is no one else, and because time runs out eventually for all of us. The real will is in this box. Thayer knows what to do with it. But the fraudulent document that Preston filed will be certified in 30 days, and after that the road back becomes very long and very difficult. What I am asking you to do is be present. Be in the room. Let Thayer fight this for you and be the person he is fighting for. I am not asking you to do it for the newspaper. I am not asking you to do it for me. I am asking you to do it because there is a community of people in Savannah who have been reading those papers for 50 years and who trust that someone is telling them the truth about their schools and their neighborhoods and their children's futures. And I would like that to stay true. And I would like it to stay true under someone who understands what it costs to be told the truth has nothing to do with you. I think you might understand that better than most. I'm sorry I waited until it was too late. I should have fought harder. You were worth fighting harder for. You always were. Gertrude Eli read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in his jacket pocket beside the dollar bill. He stood in the small storage room with the 14 notebooks and the late afternoon light coming in through a single high window. 30 days. Birch was at school right now, in room 14 with the teacher who had already started understanding that the kid was smarter than his file said. The permanent hearing for full guardianship was set for sometime later that fall, a date on a calendar that felt both very far away and suddenly pressingly close. Two things that needed him. One clock running underneath both of them. He thought about Birch, cutting bread in the dark at 3 a.m, bringing him the bigger half, because you looked like you needed it. Eli picked up the lockbox carefully. The notebook shifted slightly inside. 14 years of someone's most private and persistent love, the kind you kept even when you had nowhere to put it. He carried it out of the storage room, down the hallway, through the house that smelled like old paper and someone's private summers, out onto the porch. He stood with the lockbox under his arm and looked at the double oak in the gravel drive. Two trees fused together so long ago that the joining was invisible now. One thing, complete. I know what you were trying to say, he thought. I know. Thayer was waiting by the car, still, patient. 30 days, Eli said. Yes. And you'll tell me what I need to know. Everything I know, everything she left. Eli looked at the double oak one last time. Then he looked at Thayer. I need to pick up Birch at 3, he said. Same as always. Of course. And then we start. Then we start, Thayer agreed. Eli walked to the car. He didn't look back at the house, not because he wasn't moved, because he was, and because some things you had to walk away from in order to carry with you. The dollar was in his pocket. The letter was in his pocket. And somewhere west of Savannah, in a small storage room smelling of old earth and time, 14 notebooks waited. 30 days. The clock had started. The notebooks smelled like her. Eli didn't know what she smelled like. He'd never met her, never been in the same room, never heard her voice or seen her move or known anything about her except what a lawyer had told him and what a dollar bill had sent him to find. But the notebook smelled like someone's private life, like old paper and ink, and the specific warmth of a room that had been written in for a long time. And somehow that was enough to make his chest do something complicated. He started with the first one. January 2010. I went to the agency again today. He read until midnight, then past midnight, then until the gray Savannah dark started to go blue at the edges, and the dry cleaner's exhaust fan kicked on downstairs, and Birch's alarm went off in the back room, small and persistent, and Eli heard the thump of feet hitting floor. He'd been awake the whole night, not because he couldn't sleep, because he couldn't stop. May 2011. I sent a letter to Linden House addressed to the group supervisor. It was returned. The forwarding address was wrong, or made wrong. I'm beginning to understand that this is not administrative error. October 2012. Thayer accompanied me in person. We drove to the address. The director met us at the door. She was polite. She said the placement records were sealed pending a transfer. She said Eli had been moved 2 days prior. When I asked where, she said she couldn't release that information. When I asked who had called ahead to inform the home of our visit, she looked at a notepad on her desk and then looked away. She didn't answer. I already knew. March 2014. Preston told me today that I was overextending myself, that the search was taking a toll. He used that word, toll, like emotion was a road tax. He suggested I focus on the paper, on the legacy I'd built. He said some things are better left in the past, Aunt Gertrude. I smiled and said nothing. I have learned over many years that the most important things I've ever done were the ones I kept private from Preston Calloway. Eli set the notebook down, breathed, picked up the next one. 7 notebooks in 2 days. That was the pace, because there was also breakfast and school drop-off and the drive back and the work of being the person Birch needed him to be, during every non-notebook hour, which required all of him, which meant the notebooks got the hours between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., and Eli was running on something less than sleep, but more than adrenaline. Something like purpose. Something he hadn't had a word for before. Thayer came to the farm on the third morning, sat across from Eli at the old kitchen table with the notebooks stacked between them, looked at Eli's face, said nothing about how he looked, which Eli appreciated. "What do we need?" Eli said. "To invalidate the fraudulent document." Thayer said, "We need one of two things. Either the original signed will, which is what we have in the lockbox, or sufficient documented evidence of fraud that a court agrees to delay certification while the matter is investigated. We have the original. We have a copy, witnessed and notarized. It's strong, but Preston's attorney will argue it's a draft, that the document that was filed represents Mrs. Calloway's final intentions, that she changed her mind." "She didn't change her mind." "She didn't. But proving that requires a witness who was present when she signed the original and who can testify credibly to her state of mind. Both witnesses on that document are still living. One has already agreed to speak. The other—" Thayer paused. "The other what?" "Has been contacted by Preston's legal team." Eli looked at him. "Not threatened," Thayer said. "Just spoken with, reminded of various things. The witness is elderly and lives alone and is uncertain whether the fight is worth it at her age. So we might have one witness." "We might have one witness. And we have 26 days. 26 days. Eli looked at the notebooks. 14 years and 14 composition books, a careful hand that got slightly shakier toward the end. "The journals," he said. "Can we use them?" "As supporting evidence, not as primary proof. A journal is a private document. It demonstrates intent. It demonstrates a pattern. In combination with the copy and the witness, yes, they matter. But alone, they're not enough." Eli was quiet. "There's something else," Thayer said. "Tell me." "Preston will try to establish that you have no legitimate claim to be involved, that you are his word, I expect opportunistic, a young man who appeared from nowhere to contest a legitimate estate for personal gain." "I appeared from nowhere because someone kept me there." "Yes, and the journals document that. But courts are human institutions. Mr. Merritt and human institutions respond to narrative. Preston's narrative is cleaner on the surface. His has a name everyone in Savannah knows, and 40 years of civic presence behind it. Yours has nothing." "You," Thayer said. "Yours has you." Eli looked at the notebooks again. "Then let's make that enough," he said. Lark DeVoe arrived on a Thursday. She drove a sensible gray car, the color of something trying not to be noticed. 38 or so. Dark hair pulled back, clipboard in hand. The manner of a professional who had done this kind of visit 100 times and found it entirely unremarkable. "Estate appraisal," she told Thayer on the phone when she called ahead. "Routine inventory of assets held under the Calloway estate. Standard procedure during probate. Will need access to the property." Which was reasonable. Which was exactly how reasonable things sounded. Which should have made Eli more suspicious than it did. But he was tired. He'd been awake until 2 again with Notebook 11. Birch had had a difficult morning, a spiral that had started because the bread had run out and they'd had to use crackers, and Birch had a specific relationship with breakfast being wrong that went back to places Eli understood too well to rush. So he was tired, and DeVoe was pleasant, and she had credentials, and she asked sensible professional questions and took notes on her clipboard and admired the view from the porch and was gone within 90 minutes. And Eli thought okay, and went back to the notebooks. He should have asked more questions. He knew that later. Should have asked why estate appraisal would be ordered before the will had been certified. Should have asked why Preston's legal team would have standing to access a property held under a separate private arrangement that wasn't technically part of the estate. But he didn't. Because Notebook 12. because Gertrude had written in Notebook 12 about the day she found out Daniel had died, about sitting in her office at the Callaway Press Building on Abercorn Street and reading the investigator's report and understanding for the first time what she had actually lost. Not just the possibility of him, not just the idea of reconnecting eventually. Him, the actual person named Daniel, who had been alive and was now not. She wrote, "I sat for a long time. The phones rang. My assistant knocked twice. I didn't answer. I have built a newspaper on the principle that the truth deserves to be faced. I have fired people for hiding from it. And I sat in my own office and stared at a report about my son's death and understood perhaps for the first time how the impulse to look away begins. It begins in love. The worst impulses always do." Eli read that paragraph 4 times, so he missed the questions he should have asked. And 4 days after Lark DeVoe's visit, Thayer called. "The farm's accounts have been frozen," Thayer said. His voice was flat, the flatness of a man containing something large. Eli sat down. "What?" "Preston filed an emergency motion this morning claiming the property may be subject to estate assets and requesting a court order freezing any financial instruments associated with it, pending investigation. The motion was granted on a temporary basis pending a full hearing." "He can't do that." "He did it. The property isn't part of the estate. He knows that. He's not trying to win the argument. He's trying to run the clock." A pause. "Mr. Merritt, there's more." Eli waited. "He's spoken to attorneys in Savannah, Beaufort, Augusta. He's representing to them that you are a fraudulent claimant, that you've been manipulated by parties with a financial interest in contesting the estate, that you appeared from nowhere following Mrs. Callaway's death with an agenda that has nothing to do with her actual wishes." "That's false, entirely, and we can prove it. But in the short term, finding local counsel willing to associate with this case just became significantly more difficult." Eli stood up, sat back down, stood up again. "He's cutting off every road," he said. "Yes. Before I can even start. He's had 30 years of practice," Thayer said. "He is very good at this. And DeVoe was his. I confirmed it this morning. She was not from a neutral appraisal firm. The company she cited traces back to Preston's business interests." Eli put a hand over his mouth. "I let her in," he thought. "I offered her coffee and answered her questions and said thank you when she left. She probably reported back within the hour." "How much does he know?" Eli said. "Enough. That you have the notebooks. That you're here. That Thayer is involved. Possibly that the copy of the original will exist." A long pause. "There's something else," Thayer said. "Say it." This morning's mail included a formal legal notice. Preston Callaway and his wife Sylvia have filed a petition for emergency guardianship of a minor child, a 10-year-old named Birch. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The way a room went when something fell into it from a great height. Eli read the petition twice, then a third time, not because he didn't understand the words, but because his brain kept trying to find the part where it stopped, meaning what it meant. It didn't stop. The petition cited age of current guardian, financial instability, lack of permanent established housing, history of placement disruptions, and in language that was careful and lawyerly and devastating the concern that the current guardian was involved in contested legal proceedings that could result in significant instability for the minor child. Everything true on paper. Everything true on paper in the specific way that true things could be arranged to build a false picture. "He doesn't want Birch," Eli said. He said it to Thayer. He said it to the kitchen. He said it to Notebook 12, still open on the table. "No," Thayer agreed. "He wants me to stop. He found the one thing," Eli's voice caught. He made it not catch. "He found the one thing I'd never risk, and he put it on the table. Yes, if I fight the will, if I show up in that courtroom and challenge the document, his lawyers will use this case against me. Look at this guardian. Look at this instability. Look at this 18-year-old who thinks he can fight a 62-year-old man with a 40-year reputation in this city. It's an elegant trap, Thayer said quietly. It's more than elegant. Eli pressed his hand flat on the table, hard. He knows I'll choose Birch. He's betting that any sane person with any real love for that kid would look at what's on the table and back down. He's built a career on knowing which lever to pull, Thayer said. Eli looked at the petition. A 62-year-old man and his wife. Established. Wealthy. A home the courts would call stable. A reputation in the community. Versus Eli Merritt. 18. Bread for breakfast most mornings. $420 a month for an apartment above a dry cleaner. Currently involved in contested legal proceedings. On paper, it was obvious. On paper, there was no contest. Eli had spent his whole life understanding that on paper meant everything and nothing at the same time. He didn't tell Birch that night. He couldn't. He made dinner. Pasta with butter because it was what they had. Birch talked about school, about a project on Georgia's coastline he was doing with a girl named Petra, who was apparently very serious about both the project and being right about everything, which Birch found simultaneously impressive and exhausting. She said my map was wrong, Birch said. Was it? A pause. Slightly. So she was right. About the map. About the map she was right. About her general approach to being a person still reviewing. Eli almost laughed. Almost. Birch ate. Eli watched him eat the way he always did, making sure. After dinner, Birch brought his half of the last piece of garlic bread to Eli's side of the table without being asked. Just put it there. Went back to his homework. Eli looked at the bread, looked at Birch's back, bent over his coastline map. He couldn't eat. 3 in the morning. The worst hours were always 3 in the morning. Eli had learned that early. In the group homes, the bad thoughts came at 3, because the building went quiet, and there was nothing left to use as noise. No distraction, no task, just the dark and whatever you were trying not to think about, which became the only thing available to think about. He lay on his bed, stared at the ceiling. Maybe he's right, not Preston, about his motives. His motives are rotten, but about the conclusion. Maybe the conclusion he's using for the wrong reasons is still the right conclusion. Birch deserves stability. A real home. Schools that don't depend on whether Eli can cover next month's rent. A future that isn't tied to an 18-year-old who is currently in the middle of a legal fight he doesn't fully understand with a man who's been doing this for decades. Maybe loving someone means letting them go somewhere better. Maybe that's what Gertrude thought about Daniel. And look how that turned out. He sat up. That thought arrived like cold water. He sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his palms against his eyes and sat with the shape of it. Gertrude had let Daniel go. She'd told herself it was better for him. She'd had reasons. Good ones. Real ones. She had spent 30 years after that writing in notebooks about what those reasons had cost. Not Preston's voice. His own. Except it wasn't his. It was the voice that lived in the place fear made. The voice that dressed itself in reasonableness and practicality, and had the specific cadence of giving up without calling it that. Eli stood up, walked down the hallway, stood in the doorway of Birch's room. The kid was asleep on his side facing the window, one arm hanging off the edge of the mattress, his hair going every direction exactly as it always did. The window showed the savannah dark, a few lights across the rooftops, a sliver of moon. He watched Birch breathe. In, out. The slow rhythm of someone who was not worried right now, who was just asleep, who was for this moment entirely safe. Eli thought about what the petition said. History of placement disruptions. 7 placements in 2 years. 7 times a door had opened on a room that looked like maybe this time, and then closed. And Birch had learned not to unpack fully, had learned to sleep facing the door, had learned that adults made promises in a specific tone of voice that meant the promise was already dissolving, even as they said it. And then one afternoon in a caseworker's office, Eli had sat across from a kid with two big eyes and said, "I know what it's like to be you, and I'm not going anywhere." He'd meant it. He still meant it. He would not let a legal trap dressed up as concern for the child's welfare teach Birch the lesson that the love of someone who had nothing was worth less than the comfort of someone who had everything. He would not. He walked back to the kitchen table, sat down with notebook 13, kept reading. The hearing date for the guardianship petition arrived in the mail on a Monday. Thayer had already retained a family attorney. Her name was Marion Graves. 53, silver ponytail, glasses she took off when she was making a point and put on when she was reading, which meant her glasses went on and off at a rate that would have been distracting if she hadn't been so clearly precise about everything else. She sat across from Eli at the farm table and said, "I won't pretend this is uncomplicated." "Then don't. You're 18. You've had Birch for under a year on a provisional arrangement. No permanent home of your own. Currently involved in a contested estate proceeding." She looked at him over her glasses, then took them off. "On the other side, we have an established couple, a family name with 4 decades of community presence, private resources, and they will present this as genuine concern for the child. It doesn't matter that it isn't. It matters to me. It should, but courts don't rule on what matters to you. They rule on what they can see." She tapped the petition. "What they can see here is a child with a history of disrupted placements being cared for by a very young man in the middle of a legal storm. That's the picture. Then we change the picture. We try. What I need from you is everything, every consistent thing, every promise kept, every morning, every school drop-off, every half of the bread," Birch said from the doorway. They both looked at him. He was in his school clothes, backpack on, expression entirely matter-of-fact. "I was listening," he said. "For how long?" Eli said. "A while." He came in and sat down at the table, looked at Marion with those big watchful eyes. "Hi." "Hi," she said. "Are you trying to help Eli keep me?" "Yes." "Good." He looked at Eli. "Because I want to stay." Eli looked back at him. "The bread thing," Marion said carefully. "What does that mean?" Birch looked at her like she'd asked what the sky was. "Every morning when there's not much," he said, "Eli gives me the bigger half and says he already ate. But I know he didn't. Nobody did that before, at any of the other places." He paused. That's the main thing." Marion Graves took her glasses off, set them on the table, didn't pick them up again. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay what?" Birch said. "Okay, I think we're going to be fine." The thing was, Eli couldn't be in 2 places at once. Every hour he spent with Marion preparing for the guardianship hearing was an hour Thayer spent without him on the will case. Every hour on the will was an hour not preparing for the hearing. 23 days left on the probate clock. The hearing date 17 days out. The math was brutal, and Preston knew it. That was the point of the math. The math was the whole weapon. Eli sat with Thayer on a Wednesday evening and looked at what they had. The notarized copy of the original will. Gertrude's journals, all 14. One willing witness. One witness who was wavering. The firm that had dispatched DeVoe under false pretenses. The pattern of blocked communications documented across 14 notebooks. Strong case. Thayer said it. But not clean, Eli said. Not clean. Thayer agreed. Courts like clean. Preston will muddy everything he can. He'll claim the journals are fabricated or exaggerated. He'll argue the copy is not the final version. He'll argue your motivations that you are not acting out of respect for Mrs. Calloway's wishes, but out of personal financial interest. A young man with nothing suddenly claiming kinship with a wealthy woman's estate. Eli thought about how easy that story was to believe, about how much easier it was than the true one. The second witness, he said. The one who's wavering. What would it take? Someone to remind her why she agreed in the first place, Thayer said. She is 81 years old and frightened of a fight, and Preston's people have done their work on her. But she was there. She watched Gertrude sign that document. She witnessed it because she believed in what it said. He paused. She knew Gertrude for 60 years. Do I get to talk to her? If you want to. Yes, Eli said. I want to. The second witness lived on the east side of Savannah in a house with a very small yard that was aggressively and lovingly maintained. She was 81. Her name was Frances. She made Eli sit in a chair that was more comfortable than anything he owned and gave him sweet tea that he drank because she was 81 and you drank the tea. You look like her a little. Around the eyes, she said. Gertrude. No, Daniel. A pause. I knew him briefly, when he was very small, before. Eli said nothing. She talked about him always, Frances said. Every time I saw her, right up until the end. People who didn't know her well thought she'd made her peace with it. She hadn't. She'd just learned to carry it more quietly. Eli looked at his hands. I know what's happening, Frances said. Preston's people called, came to visit even. Very polite. She paused. They didn't threaten me. They're too smart for that. They just made the shape of the problem very clear and left me in it. And you're scared, Eli said. She looked at him. Yes, she said, simply. I'm 81, and I live alone, and I have 3 grandchildren who live in other states, and a doctor appointment every other Tuesday, and I am very tired of hard things. I understand that. Do you? I've been tired of hard things my whole life. He met her eyes. But she spent 14 years trying to find me. She documented every attempt in 14 notebooks that I have now read, and I know that she didn't stop, not because she expected anything from me, but because she thought I deserved to be found. He paused. She was right, and so do the people who read those newspapers, and so do you. Frances held her sweet tea with both hands. Outside, a bird was working through its morning repertoire on the fence. She always said, Frances said slowly, that the most important stories were the ones people thought didn't matter enough to print. The school board meeting nobody covered. The neighborhood park that almost got sold. The obituary of the woman who ran the food pantry for 30 years and was never once in a headline. I read that, in the journals. She meant every word. She looked at him. If Preston controls the paper, those stories stop getting told. Silence. All right, Frances said. All right, I'll testify. She put her glass down. When I was a child, my mother told me that the right things were usually the inconvenient things, and the convenient things were usually the wrong ones. She said if you waited until a brave choice was comfortable, you'd be waiting until you were dead. A small, tight smile. She was right about most things. Eli breathed. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. Preston Calloway has been the biggest name in this city for 30 years. She looked at him steadily. You understand what you're actually doing here. I'm starting to. Good, she said. Then finish your tea. The letter about the guardianship hearing came while Eli was driving Birch home from school. He read it at a red light. Birch watched his face. What is it? Date for the hearing. 2 weeks from Thursday. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. Which direction is it leaning? Eli looked at him, 10 years old, asking which direction something was leaning. Go do your homework, Eli said. I don't have any. Then go pretend to do homework so I can think. Birch looked at him one more second, then turned and looked out the window. Eli. Yeah. I want you to know I'm not scared. Birch. I'm not, because you promised, and you don't break promises. You're the only person I've ever known who doesn't break promises. A pause. So I'm not scared. Eli looked at the road. The light had been green for a while. He drove. He was scared. Enough for both of them, but he wasn't going to say that. On a Thursday evening that had been unremarkable in every other way, Sylvia Calloway came to the farm, not with Preston, alone. She drove herself in a smaller car than the one they used together. Older. She was wearing a gray cardigan and sensible shoes and no pearls, which Eli noted because the pearls had been at the will reading like armor. Without them, she looked smaller, more like a person and less like a role she'd been handed. Thayer had called to say she was coming, his voice carefully neutral in a way that communicated something Eli didn't quite understand yet. "Should I be there?" Eli said. "She asked to meet with the boy first," Thayer said. "Per the guardianship process. The petitioning party is entitled to a supervised visit. The caseworker will be present. And then we'll see." Eli stood in the kitchen while the caseworker sat in the corner with her clipboard and Sylvia Calloway sat across from Birch at the farm table. Birch looked at her the way he looked at all adults, with those eyes, recording. She asked him what he liked about school. He said the coastline project a little once you got past Petra's confidence about everything. She asked him what he liked about the farm. He said the double oak, and how sometimes at night you could actually see stars, and the mockingbirds in the morning. She asked, "Are you happy here?" Birch thought about it. "Happy is a big word," he said. "It is," she agreed. "I'm safe," he said. "And I know what to expect. Like I know Eli will be there at 3 o'clock, every single time. And I know in the morning there will be breakfast even if it's small and I'll get the bigger piece." He looked at her directly. "Before with other placements I didn't know those things. I had to guess every day. Guessing every day is really tiring." Sylvia looked at him. "I imagine it is," she said quietly. "Eli says I don't have to guess anymore." Birch paused. "He keeps being right about that." Sylvia looked down at her hands. She had the same posture she'd carried into the will reading, sitting very straight, hands folded. But something in her face was different now, like a window that had been painted shut for a long time and was finally asking itself whether it might open. She poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the table, poured a glass for Birch, pushed the fuller one toward him without thinking about it. Birch looked at the fuller glass, then looked up at her. She didn't understand in that moment why that made her eyes sting. She just knew it did. She was in her car in the driveway for a long time after the visit. Eli watched from the window. Thayer stood beside him. Neither said anything. After a while, she got out. She didn't go back inside. She walked to the double oak at the end of the drive and stood with one hand on the bark, looking at where the two trunks had grown into each other so completely that the seam had long since disappeared. Eli went out. They stood on opposite sides of the tree. "She loved this tree," Sylvia said. Not to him specifically, just to the air. "I can see why," Eli said. A pause. "Preston doesn't know I'm here." Eli said nothing. The visit was on the schedule, required for the petition, but the conversation I need to have with you wasn't. She looked at him. Her face was composed and exhausted, and something else Eli didn't have a word for yet. "I've been married to Preston Calloway for 29 years. I know who he is. I've known for a long time. And I have made a great many decisions in those 29 years about what I was willing to see and what I would choose not to look at." She paused. "I am very good at choosing not to look at things." A bird called once from somewhere in the oak above them and went quiet. "I don't want to be good at that anymore," Sylvia said. She reached into her cardigan pocket, pulled out an envelope, standard letter size, slightly crumpled, the kind that had been taken out and put back several times over several months. She held it out. "After Gertrude died," she said, "I helped clear her room. Preston asked me to because he knew I'd want to, and because he trusted me to—" She stopped, started again. To handle things properly. That was the word he used. Properly. Eli took the envelope. In the drawer beside her bed, Sylvia said. Under the reading lamp. There was a document. I recognized it because I have been present for enough legal proceedings in 29 years to recognize a notarized will. Eli opened the envelope. Inside a photocopy. Black and white. 2 pages. He could read the header, could read the date, could read Gertrude May Calloway at the bottom above 2 notary stamps that translated even in black and white. April 18th, the same date as the copy in the lockbox. The same document. Preston told me to burn it, Sylvia said. He said it was an old draft, that the final version superseded it, that keeping it would just complicate things. She looked at the envelope in Eli's hands. He was very calm about it. Preston is always calm. He makes everything sound so, she exhaled, manageable, reasonable, like the obvious thing to do is always the thing that happens to benefit him. You kept it, Eli said. I copied it first, then I let him think I'd burned the original. A pause. I don't know what made me do that. At the time, I told myself it was just in case. Her hands were at her sides now, very still. But I think I knew. Some part of me I'd been ignoring for 29 years was paying attention and decided that this was the moment. He doesn't know you have this, Eli said. No. He'll know eventually. I know. She looked at him steadily. I filed the petition with him. I was in that room. And I need you to understand that I didn't know at the time. I didn't understand that the boy would... She stopped. When Preston explained the plan to me, it was abstract, a procedural lever, a way to create pressure that would make the estate challenge untenable, that you'd back down, that I'd choose Birch over the will. Yes, she held his gaze. I didn't understand that it would mean sitting across from a 10-year-old who talks about bread. Eli said nothing. She looked at the photocopy in his hands. Gertrude spent her life printing things that deserve to be known, Sylvia said. She told me once that the bravest thing you could do with truth was not discover it. It was decide to print it when printing it cost you something. A long beat. This is going to cost me quite a lot, she said. Eli looked at the photocopy. A 60-year friendship, 14 notebooks, a notarized copy in a metal lockbox, and a photocopy kept in a cardigan pocket for 3 months because the truest part of a person had refused in the end to let it disappear. Thank you, he said. She shook her head. Don't. Not yet. She looked toward the house. How is he, the boy? He's good, Eli said. He's actually good. The thing he said, about guessing. She pressed her lips together. I spent 29 years guessing, every morning, wondering which version of Preston I was waking up next to, whether it would be a good day or a careful day, whether I could bring up the thing I'd been not bringing up, or whether today was the wrong day for it. She paused. It is a very tiring way to live. I know, Eli said. I know you do. She looked at him. You turned out well, I think, given everything. The jury's still out. The jury, she said, is watching you walk through the hardest month of your life and pick that child up from school every single day at 3 o'clock. They're paying attention. She went back to her car, drove away down the gravel drive, past the double oak where 2 trees had grown so long together that you couldn't find the seam. Eli stood in the drive, holding a photocopy of a will that a woman had kept in her cardigan pocket for 3 months because the truest part of her had refused in the end to let it disappear. He breathed, counted the days. 17 left on the clock. 17. He went back inside. Thayer was at the table. Eli set the photocopy down in front of him. The lawyer looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he looked up at Eli with those still eyes that had seen a great deal and held most of it in reserve. Well, Thayer said. Yeah, Eli said. This changes the balance. I know. Significantly. I know. Eli sat down. Tell me what we need to do next. Thayer picked up the photocopy, turned it over, looked at both sides. We need two things, he said. Frances on the stand, and Sylvia willing to testify about the circumstances under which she found this and what she was asked to do with it. She'll do it. You're confident. Eli thought about a woman standing at a double oak with her hand on the bark where two things had grown into one. She already decided, he said, before she drove out here. The coming out here was her telling us. Thayer looked at him. Your grandmother, he said slowly, used to say that the most important quality in a journalist was the ability to read the room, to walk in and within 30 seconds know what was true and what was being performed and which was which. She wrote that in the notebooks. She said it in life, too. He set the photocopy down. You have that quality, Mr. Merritt. Eli looked at the photocopy, at the handwriting that matched the will in the lockbox, at the two red stamps that meant someone had been there, had witnessed, had decided this was worth making official. Gertrude's signature, slightly unsteady, the hand of someone who had been ill for a while, but was still precise about the things that mattered. He thought about what it cost her to sign it, knowing Preston was in the next room, knowing she might not live long enough for it to matter. Signing it anyway. 17 days, Eli said. 17 days. Thayer agreed. Then let's use all of them. Outside, the Georgia evening settled in over the farm. The double oak stood at the end of the gravel drive, patient and enormous, and entirely unbothered by anything happening beneath it. Somewhere in Savannah, a man named Preston Calloway was sitting in a building that had another person's name on it, certain he had already won, certain the clever trap would do what clever traps were supposed to do, certain that everyone in the end had a price. He had no idea that his wife had been paying attention for 29 years. He had no idea she'd been waiting for a 10-year-old to pour a fuller glass of water, and 17 days was exactly enough time to show him. 17 days. That was what they had. 17 mornings of Eli waking before the alarm. 17 evenings of Birch making toast badly and sliding the bigger piece across the table without being asked. 17 nights of the farm settling around them in the dark, the double oak standing guard at the end of the gravel drive, the Georgia dark pressing close and still. Eli used every hour. Not dramatically. Not in the way of movies where someone suddenly becomes a different person and everything accelerates. Just steadily. The way water moved. The way the Spanish moss grew. With the patience of something that had decided it wasn't stopping. Thayer worked the legal side. Filed motions. Built the evidentiary framework. Assembled what they had into the shape a court could understand. Frances came to the farm twice to go over her testimony, sitting at the kitchen table with her sweet tea and her matter-of-fact courage, answering Thayer's practice questions in the voice of a woman who had decided that 81 was old enough to stop being afraid of inconvenience. Eli read the remaining notebooks. All of them. And somewhere in Notebook 13 on a Tuesday in October 11 years ago, Gertrude had written something Eli read 3 times and then sat with for a long time in the quiet of the farm kitchen. I went back through the old papers today. The first issue I ever printed. June 1974. We had 1 used press and 2 reporters and enough money for exactly 6 months. My husband said I was being reckless. My accountant said the same. I remember thinking all the important things start by being reckless. All the things worth having require you to walk into the room before you know what you're doing in it. I wonder sometimes if that's what I should have told Daniel. If I'd had the chance. Walk into the room. You don't have to know yet. Just walk in. The guardianship hearing came first. Thursday, 9 in the morning. The same courthouse Eli had been in before at various points in his life, for various reasons that were all at their core about someone deciding what happened to him next. Fluorescent lights, that particular linoleum color that wasn't any color exactly. Benches in the hallway full of people holding folders, like the folders were something to hold on to. He wore the gray button down again. Birch had ironed it again. The diagonal crease across the left shoulder was slightly more committed this time, like Birch had decided it was a signature. Eli wore it anyway. Marion Graves was already there when they arrived. Silver ponytail, glasses on. She looked at Eli, looked at Birch, looked at the shirt. Said nothing about the shirt. Good lawyer. Preston arrived 7 minutes later with 2 attorneys, and Sylvia and the quality of a man entering a room he had already decided he owned. Gray suit, gold ring, the jaw. He didn't look at Eli. He looked at the room and found it satisfactory. Sylvia walked in behind him. She looked at Eli. Just briefly. Just a second. And then she looked away. Sat down. Folded her hands in her lap. Same posture as the will reading. Same pearls. But something underneath had shifted. Like a painting hung at a slightly different angle. Same frame. Different light. Preston still didn't know. Eli had thought about that. About the moment Preston found out. He'd stopped thinking about it deliberately, because this morning required all of him. The hearing began. Preston's lead attorney was a man named Garfield, who understood that confidence was a performance, and had been performing it for 30 years. He was good, very good. He laid out the case in the methodical way of someone building something that would hold weight. The age concern, the financial instability, the contested estate proceeding creating uncertainty, the provisional nature of the current arrangement. All of it true, all of it arranged to tell the worst possible story from the most sympathetic possible angle. And then the alternative. Preston and Sylvia Calloway. Established. Resourced. A home with space and stability. Good schools. A future that didn't depend on a legal outcome. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patricia Lowell, 60-something. Steel gray hair cut close. Eyes that had calibrated over many years very precisely what was performance and what was not. She listened to Garfield with her pen in her hand and her face giving nothing at all. Then Marion stood. She didn't perform. That was the thing about Marion. She just talked. Steady and direct, like she was explaining something she found genuinely important, not arguing a case. She talked about consistency, about what consistency meant to a child who had not had it, about 7 placements in 2 years, and what that did to a person, particularly a small person, particularly one who had learned to read every room before unpacking a bag. She talked about a provisional arrangement that had by every measurable indicator not been provisional in the ways that mattered. Same school, same address, same person at the gate at 3 o'clock, every single day. She talked about what stability actually looked like when you stripped away the size of the house and the name of the school district and got down to the material that held a child together. She talked briefly about bread. The judge's pen moved once, then stopped. Then Honorable Patricia Lowell set her pen down entirely and looked at Birch, who was sitting very still in a chair too big for him in the nice clothes Eli had bought and washed twice so they were soft now, not stiff. "I'd like to speak with the child," she said. Marion nodded. Garfield started to say something, stopped. And Birch, who had been still and watchful and had not made a sound for the entire preceding 40 minutes of adults talking about his future in the third person, stood up like he'd been waiting for this and walked toward the judge's bench with the particular walk of a child who has learned not to hurry, because hurrying sometimes made adults change their minds. Judge Lowell came down from the bench. She knelt, not in a theatrical way, just practically because he was small and she wanted to be level with him, the thing some adults knew to do without being told. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Birch said. "You know what I do here." "Decide things," he said. "Yes, decide things. And I want to decide this one right. So I want to ask you something and I need you to just tell me the truth." "Okay. Whatever the truth is, even if you think it's not the right answer. There isn't a right answer." Birch looked at her steadily. "Okay," he said. She gestured very slightly toward where Preston and Sylvia sat. "These folks have a big house, a lot of resources, could give you a lot of things." Then toward Eli. "And you have Eli, who is very young and doesn't have much yet." She looked at Birch directly. "If you could choose where to be, where would you be?" The courtroom was very quiet. Preston's hands were flat on the table. Sylvia's were in her lap. Eli was looking at the linoleum and counting his own heartbeat. Birch was quiet for a moment, not uncertain, just giving the question the weight it deserved. Then he said, "Can I say 2 things?" "Yes," the judge said. "The first thing is that every morning there's not much food, and Eli gives me the bigger half and says he already ate, but he didn't. And he does it every morning without talking about it or making it into something." The judge waited. "The second thing," Birch said, "is that I used to count exits at every new place. First thing I'd do when they showed me my room. Find the window, find the door, figure out how to get out if I needed to. I did that everywhere." He paused. "I stopped doing it here. I don't count exits anymore, because I know I'm not going to need one." The judge looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, slowly, with the effort of someone who had been kneeling on linoleum for slightly too long and found it completely worth it. She looked at Eli, then at Preston. Then she picked up her pen. And that was when Sylvia Calloway stood up. Not in response to anything, not because it was her turn, just stood up. Preston turned to look at her so fast it was almost a flinch. "Sylvia." One word, a warning wrapped in a name. She didn't sit down. "Your Honor," she said. Her voice was steady, the pearls absolutely still. "I need to say something to this court, and I recognize it isn't my turn, and I apologize for the interruption, but if I don't say it now, I'm not sure I will have the ability to say it at all." Judge Lowell looked at her for a moment. "Go ahead," she said. Sylvia looked at her hands, then looked up, directly at the judge. "The petition we filed is not what it appears to be. It was not motivated by concern for this child. It was motivated by a business dispute in which my husband is currently disadvantaged, and in which this young man's continued focus on that dispute is inconvenient for us." She paused. "My husband explained it to me as a procedural move, a way to divide the other party's attention and resources. He did not anticipate that I would meet the child." The room had gone very still. "I met him 3 days ago," Sylvia said. "He poured me a fuller glass of water. He didn't know who I was or why I was there, or that my husband was trying to use him as a lever in a legal proceeding. He just poured me a fuller glass of water because I was the guest." She stopped. Her voice wavered once and then steadied. "I have been married for 29 years to a man who has never once in that time poured anyone a fuller glass of anything." Preston said her name again, low, controlled, but with something underneath it that was not controlled at all. She didn't look at him. "I also have information relevant to a separate proceeding that I intend to present to the appropriate court," she said, "regarding the estate of Gertrude May Calloway." She looked at the judge. "I apologize again for the disruption. I don't have anything else to add." She sat down, and the room exhaled. Judge Lowell took 11 minutes. Eli sat in the hallway with Birch beside him, Thayer on the phone at the far end, Marion making notes, the linoleum going in every direction under the fluorescent light. Birch ate a granola bar he'd had in his pocket, offered Eli the bigger half. "I'm fine," Eli said. "Sure you are," Birch said, and ate both halves because he was 10 and hadn't actually had breakfast. The bailiff came out. 11 minutes. They went back in. Provisional guardianship upheld. Petition by the Calloways dismissed, with a notation in the record about the stated motivations as described by Mrs. Sylvia Calloway, with a strong recommendation entered formally that the permanent hearing be expedited and looked upon favorably toward the current arrangement. That was the official language. What actually happened was, Birch got up from his chair and walked across the courtroom and stood in front of Eli and said nothing, just looked at him, and Eli pulled him in and held the back of his head with one hand, and felt the wild hair against his palm, and made himself breathe. "Told you," Birch said from somewhere against Eli's shoulder, muffled, small. "Yeah," Eli said. His voice came out wrong. He didn't try to fix it. "Told you you don't break promises." "Yeah. Can we get breakfast now?" Eli almost laughed. Almost. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we can get breakfast." He held on for one more second, then let go. Because there was still the clock. 14 days left, and Preston Calloway had just lost one battle in a war he didn't yet understand was already over. They didn't see Preston leave, but Thayer told them later that he'd exited the courthouse without speaking to anyone, including his attorneys, and driven away, and that Sylvia had left separately, in the smaller car, the older one, without looking back. The probate court hearing was set for a Friday, which meant 13 more days of the quiet work. Thayer filing, building, the evidentiary structure going up piece by piece like scaffolding around something that needed to hold real weight. Frances came again, twice. Her testimony was calm and precise and utterly devastating in the way simple, truthful things could be devastating when stacked carefully next to complicated, dishonest ones. Sylvia called Thayer on a Monday evening, said she was prepared to testify, said Preston had moved out of the house over the weekend, said she had retained her own counsel, said she was fine, just fine. Thayer relayed all of this to Eli without editorial commentary, which was Thayer's way. Eli sat with it for a moment, with the shape of a woman who had kept a photocopy in her cardigan pocket for 3 months, and then one Thursday morning stood up in a courtroom because a 10-year-old had poured her a fuller glass of water. 29 years, and that was the thing that had finally moved her. Not a legal argument, not a financial incentive, not even the truth about the will which she had known in some form all along. A child being generous with water, because it was the only thing available to be generous with. Eli thought about that for a long time. He thought about Gertrude writing in those notebooks, "I will not stop," over and over in different years, different seasons. The same sentence in 10 different versions. Patient and stubborn and alive with something that refused to quit. He thought about Birch cutting bread in the dark at 3 in the morning because he'd noticed that Eli hadn't eaten. He thought about Frances at 81, saying her mother told her the brave choices were the inconvenient ones. The world moved he was starting to understand in these small gestures, not in the legal proceedings, not in the courtrooms or the offices or the conference tables. In the fuller glass, in the bigger half, in the act of noticing that someone needed something and giving it without making it into a performance. That was where everything actually happened. The night before the hearing, Eli couldn't sleep, which was not surprising. He lay in the dark and went through the case the way Thayer had taught him. The copy of the will, witnessed, notarized. The photocopy Sylvia had kept. The pattern documented across 14 notebooks. Frances's testimony. Sylvia's. The blocked communications. The fraudulent filing. All of it adding up. Strong case Thayer had said. As strong as it gets without the original document itself. Without the original. That was the one piece still soft. Preston's attorney would argue copy, would argue draft, would argue that a woman in her final illness had changed her mind, and the document filed represented her actual final wishes. It was not a fatal argument, but it was the one Eli couldn't fully close. He lay there and stared at the ceiling and came back to the same place every night for a week. That strong was not the same as certain, and certain was not something you got to have usually when you were going into a fight against someone who had been fighting this kind of fight for 30 years. You did the work. You built the best case you could, and then you walked into the room. Walk into the room. You don't have to know yet. Just walk in. He pulled the dollar bill out of his shirt pocket. He'd been carrying it there every day since the beginning. Not a decision exactly. It had just stayed. Like it had always been there. Like it had been in his pocket for 18 years, which in a way it had. He unfolded it in the dark. He couldn't read the pencil marks in the low light, couldn't see the small words at the bottom right corner, but he knew what they said. West Storage, the Double Oak, Thayer will take you. An old woman with a steady hand, writing small on purpose, hiding a message where only the right person would find it, trusting that the plan would hold. It had held. He folded the bill back up, put it over his heart, slept. The probate courthouse was different from the family court. Older building, higher ceilings, wood paneling that had been there long enough to go dark, the smell of old paper and formal proceedings, the weight of the place. Eli sat beside Thayer at a long table. Across the aisle, Preston Calloway and two attorneys, one of whom was Garfield, who had not had a good Thursday and was compensating today with an extra layer of deliberate calm. Preston looked at Eli when he sat down, for the first time since the will reading. A real look, not the dismissive glance of a man who thought he'd already won. This was different. This was a man recalibrating, which meant he knew, or suspected, or had woken up on a Monday morning to find his wife's car gone, and had started understanding that the territory he thought he controlled was not what he'd thought it was. Eli looked back at him, held it, didn't look away first. Preston looked at the table. The judge was a man named Honorable Carl Whitfield, late 60s, unhurried, enough years on the bench to have stopped being impressed by performances, and started being interested only in the substance underneath them. He let both sides present. Garfield went first, confident, methodical. The fraudulent document was the legitimate one. A copy of a previous draft produced by an interested party did not supersede a properly filed and witnessed final will. Mrs. Calloway had been of declining health in her final months and had relied on those around her to help manage her affairs. The document filed represented those wishes as understood by her family. Her family. Garfield used that word. Eli noted it. Then Thayer stood. He just talked, like he was in a room with a reasonable person, and trusted that the truth laid out with care was enough. Thayer laid out the timeline. April 18th. The signing. Francis there. Sylvia there. The notarization. The lockbox. The key on the dollar bill. The 14 notebooks spanning 14 years of documented communication attempts, each one traceable, each one corresponding with Preston Calloway's increasing administrative control over Mrs. Calloway's affairs. Then he called Francis. Francis walked to the witness chair with the steady deliberateness of someone who had decided that morning to be brave and had been brave so consistently over the past weeks that it had started to feel almost ordinary. She described the April 18th signing, in detail, in the specific detail of someone who had been in that room, who had known the person signing, who had understood the significance of what they were witnessing. Gertrude's state of mind, alert, deliberate. She had read the document through twice. She had asked Thayer to read one section aloud again. She had asked Francis to confirm the date on her calendar. She had signed her name slowly but clearly, and looked at both witnesses afterward and said, "There. Now it's real. There. Now it's real." Garfield cross-examined, suggested that Francis's memory at 81 might be imperfect, that a 14-month-old recollection carried inherent uncertainty, that Mrs. Calloway's health at that time. Francis looked at him. "Young man," she said, "I have been in this city for 81 years. I have known Gertrude Calloway for 60 of them. I know the difference between a woman of sound mind and a woman who is confused. And I know the difference between a document I witnessed because I believed in it, and one I witnessed because someone told me to." She paused. "Do you have another question?" Garfield did not have another question. Then Thayer called Sylvia. Preston went very still. Sylvia walked to the stand without looking at him. She was wearing gray today. No pearls, just herself, which turned out to be considerable. She described finding the document in the drawer beside Gertrude's bed, described recognizing it, described Preston's instruction to burn it, and then she described the decision she had made in the moment, the copy she had run in the small office off the hallway while Preston was on the phone, the envelope she had kept in the pocket of her cardigan for 3 months. Garfield objected. Several times. Thayer handled it. The judge made notes. "Why did you keep it?" Thayer asked. Sylvia looked at her hands, then up. "Because Gertrude spent 60 years telling the truth in print," she said. "She built her whole life around the conviction that truth deserved to be known. Not just when it was convenient. Not just when it cost nothing. When it mattered." A pause. "I wasn't sure when I kept the copy that I was going to do anything with it. But I knew that if I burned it, I would spend the rest of my life knowing that I'd helped erase the last true thing she put her name to." The room was quiet. "And then I met the boy," Sylvia added, quietly, almost to herself. "And I understood what she was trying to protect." Garfield gave his closing. Competent. Professional. The best version of an argument that did not fundamentally have the truth on its side. Thayer gave his. 7 minutes. Clear as water. The kind of closing that didn't need volume or drama because the pieces held together on their own. Judge Whitfield removed his glasses, polished them, put them back on, looked at the documents on the table. "I'm going to take a recess," he said. 45 minutes. Eli went outside. The Savannah morning had gone warm. Summer pressing in at the edges of September the way it did here, reluctant to let go. The live oaks along the street draped their moss in the still air. A pigeon walked the sidewalk with the unhurried confidence of urban wildlife everywhere. Birch was at school. That was what he held on to. Birch was at school right now in room 14, probably in some pleasant disagreement with Petra about something coastline-related. Safe. There. Not counting exits. Eli sat on the courthouse steps, pressed his hand against his shirt pocket. The dollar bill. He took it out, held it in the morning light, the soft worn paper. The pencil marks at the corner barely visible now, the words he'd read so many times he no longer needed to see them. He thought about Gertrude at 22, making a choice she would carry for 30 years. He thought about Daniel growing up in the same system, aging out the same way, becoming by all accounts a man who made people feel steadied just by being in the room. He thought about himself at 4 years old, going into the system, not knowing that somewhere in Savannah an old woman was trying to find him, writing it down, not stopping. 3 generations, 3 people navigating the same specific loneliness from different angles. And this dollar bill, this soft, worn piece of paper that had done more work than most things 3 times its size. Thayer came out and sat beside him. They didn't talk. The pigeon continued its circuit. The live oaks moved slightly in something that might have been a breeze. "Whatever happens," Eli said. "Yes," Thayer said. "I want you to know I understand why she did it the way she did. The dollar, the message, the lockbox." He looked at the bill. "She couldn't come to me directly. Preston had too much control. She couldn't file anything he'd see. She couldn't make it obvious. So she made it small. Made it something only the right person would recognize as what it was. Yes, she trusted that I'd understand a hidden message." He paused. "Because she knew I'd grown up needing to read things that weren't being said out loud." Thayer was quiet for a moment. "She knew a great deal about you," he said. "From the investigator, from what she could piece together over the years. She knew you were sharp, that you paid attention, that the system had taken a great deal from you, but hadn't taken that." He paused. "She was right. She was also right that I'd come." Eli looked at the bill. "She counted on that, on me being the person who would walk into the room even when I didn't know what I was walking into." "Were you always that person?" Eli thought about it. "I was always the person who picked up Birch at 3 o'clock, he said. "Same as always, even when I was terrified, especially then." He folded the bill. "Maybe that's the same thing." The bailiff appeared at the top of the steps. 45 minutes. They went back in. Judge Whitfield settled his papers. Preston Calloway sat very straight. Thayer was still. Eli put his hand in his jacket pocket, touched the edge of the folded bill, just briefly, then put his hand back on the table. "I've reviewed the evidentiary record," Judge Whitfield said. "I've heard testimony from 2 witnesses to the document dated April 18th. I've reviewed the notarized copy of that document alongside the document filed for probate on September 4th. I've considered the supplemental materials, including personal journals, spanning 14 years and a certified timeline of communication attempts." He looked at his papers. The April 18th document appears to reflect the genuine and considered intentions of Mrs. Gertrude May Calloway, executed with full capacity and proper witnessing. The weight of testimony and corroborating documentation supports this conclusion. A pause. "The document filed for probate on September 4th presents inconsistencies that I find I cannot overlook. I'm ordering a full forensic review of that document, its signatures, and the circumstances of its execution. Pending that review, probate certification is stayed. The April 18th document is provisionally recognized as the operative testamentary instrument." Another pause. "I'm also referring the circumstances of this filing to the appropriate authorities for further investigation." He took his glasses off. "This court is adjourned." The room moved. Attorneys gathered papers. The Calloway legal team conferred in low, rapid voices. Garfield looked at Preston with the expression of a professional who had done his best and knew it wasn't enough, and was now preparing a carefully worded post-mortem that cost a great deal per hour. Preston stood and turned and looked at Eli for the second time today. This look was different from the first one, different from the will reading, different from the recalibration of this morning. This was the look of a man who had been certain for 30 years, absolutely certain, that he understood how the world worked and what people were for and what drove them and what a thing was worth and what a person could be bought for. Certain in the deep, comfortable way of someone who had never once been wrong, looking at someone who had proven him wrong, and not understanding how. Eli stood. He looked at Preston Calloway, at the silver temples and the good suit and the jaw that had spent 62 years, never having to apologize for anything, at the man who had kept an old woman from her grandchild for 14 years and called it managing things properly, who had used a 10-year-old as a lever in a financial dispute and called it concern for the child's welfare. Eli reached into his jacket pocket, took out the dollar bill. He didn't cross the room with it, didn't make a production, just held it up briefly so Preston could see it. The old, worn paper, the soft creases, the message in pencil at the corner that had sent a boy, "No one counted," into a storage room in the West Georgia woods, and changed everything. Preston looked at it, and something crossed his face that Eli had not expected. Not anger, not contempt, not the performance of either, just recognition of what it meant, of what it had cost him, of how small a thing had been his undoing. A dollar bill, an old woman who trusted the right person to read a message no one else was supposed to find. "She always was smarter than me," Preston said, very quietly, to no one in particular. And then he walked out. His attorneys followed, and the room was just a room again. Old wood, high ceilings, the smell of proceedings and paper and the particular quality of places where things were decided. Eli looked at the dollar bill one more time. Then he folded it. Carefully. The same fold lines, the same soft creases. Put it back in his jacket pocket, against his heart, where it had been since the beginning. Thayer put his hand briefly on Eli's shoulder. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. He called Birch from the courthouse steps. 3 rings. Then, "You're not supposed to call during school." "I know. Is everything okay?" "Yeah." A pause. "Yeah. Yeah, Birch. It's okay." The sound of a hallway. Birch moving away from a classroom with that purposeful quiet of a kid who didn't want to get caught on his phone. "How okay?" Birch said. "The kind of okay where you can stop counting exits." Silence on the line. Then, We won. We're on the right side of it. Still some process, but yeah, the right side. Another pause. Longer. Can we get the good bread tonight? Birch said. From the bakery on Jones Street. Eli pressed his hand against his jacket pocket. Yeah, he said. Yeah, we can get the good bread. Okay. A beat. Eli. Yeah. I want both halves. Eli laughed. A real one. Loud enough that a woman passing on the sidewalk looked at him and smiled reflexively, the way people smiled at someone laughing like they meant it. You can have both halves, he said. Don't tell me that. I don't actually want both halves. I just wanted to hear you say I could. Birch. Go do lawyer stuff. I have to get back before Petra notices I left. The line went quiet. Eli stood on the courthouse steps in the Savannah September warmth, laughed again, smaller, private, looked up at the live oak across the street, the moss moving slightly, the light coming through in pieces, walked to find Thayer. There was still process after that. Forensic review, investigation. The slow machinery of institutions doing what institutions did. Eli was not naive enough to think it was over in that courtroom. It was over enough, over in the way that mattered. The direction had been set. Preston Calloway did not face consequences quickly. The investigation took time and the findings took longer, and the legal proceedings that followed were exactly as long and complicated as legal proceedings involving a man with 40 years of civic standing, and very good attorneys always were. But the outcome had been set on a Friday morning in a wood-paneled courtroom when a judge took off his glasses and ordered a forensic review. The rest was process. Eli had learned over the preceding weeks to trust the process as long as the direction was right. 6 months later, the Calloway Press Building on Abercorn Street had the same sign it had always had, the old hand-lettered one Gertrude had put up in 1974 and refused to replace because she said it looked like it meant something. It still looked like it meant something. Inside, in the editorial meeting room, a board Eli had helped select was 3 months into its tenure. Older journalists, people who had been at the paper for decades, people who remembered what Gertrude had built it to be. They'd asked Eli to sit on the advisory committee, and he'd said yes, and shown up to every meeting and mostly listened, which was they told him exactly what they'd hoped he'd do. He wasn't running anything. He was 18 years old and he didn't know enough yet, and he knew that he didn't know enough, which was itself. Thayer told him more than half the battle. He was learning, the same way he'd learned everything, at the table after midnight, one notebook at a time. Except now, the notebook was the paper itself. Every issue, every editorial decision, every community meeting he sat in the back of and listened. Every story that almost didn't get covered and did. The school board meeting nobody else sent a reporter to. The neighborhood park that had been quietly scheduled for development. The obituary of the woman who had run the food pantry on Montgomery Street for 31 years and had never once been in a headline until now. There. Now it's real. The Gertrude Calloway Community Center opened on a Wednesday in late November. Not a grand event. No ribbon cutting in the newspaper sense. Just doors opening. Kids coming in from the cold. The particular smell of a space that had been repainted recently and was still learning what it wanted to smell like once it had been lived in for a while. In the neighborhood where Hargrove House was, 4 blocks from where Eli had grown up. 3 blocks from the dry cleaner on Hartwell Lane. Space for kids aging out, for the ones coming up behind them. A place to learn things the system hadn't gotten around to teaching. Practical things. Resume finances. How to talk to a landlord. How to advocate for yourself in a room full of people who assumed you wouldn't. Things Eli had figured out by getting them wrong first. Francis came to the opening. Walked through every room. Looked at the small kitchen with its round table and 4 chairs, and its window looking out onto the street, and stood there for a moment, not saying anything. Then she said, she would have wanted the table bigger. We can get a bigger table, Eli said. Do that, she said. Kids need room. He put a bigger table in the next week. Sylvia Calloway came too, alone, quietly. She arrived after most people had gone and stood in the hallway looking at the sign on the wall. The sign was simple, white background, the center's name in plain letters, and below it smaller, the kind of thing you had to be close to read truth, deserves to be faced. G. C. Sylvia stood there for a long time. Eli stood beside her. "She used to say that," Sylvia said. "I know. She wrote it in Notebook 4. I heard her say it out loud so many times I stopped really hearing it." She looked at the sign. "I hear it now." They stood there a moment. "The divorce is final next month," she said. "I know. Thayer told me. The volunteering helps. The work here, if you'll have me." She looked at him. "I'm not asking for anything. I know I don't have standing to ask. I just want to be useful. In the direction of right this time." Eli thought about what Gertrude had written, about holding two true things at once, about the most expensive mistakes being the ones made by trusting the wrong person, about the bravest choices being the inconvenient ones. "Tuesday afternoons," he said. "We run a workshop for kids who are about to age out. Life skills, practical stuff. Marion Graves sometimes talks about legal basics, what rights you have, what to do when you don't know what you're doing." He looked at her. "We need someone who knows about managing things, finances, how to deal with institutions, how to advocate for yourself without burning every bridge." Sylvia looked at him. 29 years of managing things," he said. "That's a lot of practice. Not always in the right direction. Then use it in the right one now." She was quiet for a moment. "Tuesdays," she said. "Tuesdays." She nodded. Once. The nod of a decision, not just an acknowledgement. Birch ran in from the back. He'd been in the rec room with 3 other kids doing something competitive with a basketball that had resulted in a level of noise, suggesting everyone was having an excellent time. He had something on his shirt that was probably from the snack table. His hair was doing everything it always did and always would. He saw Sylvia and stopped, looked at her. She looked back at him. "Hi," he said. "Hello, Birch." A pause. "You came," he said. "I came." She agreed. He considered her for a moment with those eyes. The watchful ones. The ones that had spent years reading rooms and reading adults and calibrating quickly and precisely what they were and weren't. Then he said, "You want some of the cookies from the snack table. They're the good kind, with the chocolate." "I would like that very much," Sylvia said. "I'll get you the bigger one," Birch said, and went to get it. Sylvia looked at Eli. Something in her face was very full and very careful at the same time. "That's a good boy," she said. "Yeah," Eli said. "He is." The permanent guardianship hearing was in December. The same judge, Honorable Patricia Lowell, the same courthouse, different feeling entirely. The weight of it different. Marion was there, same silver ponytail, glasses on, then off, then on. Birch wore the same nice clothes. Eli had ironed the shirt this time properly, which Birch had regarded with mild suspicion. "It's not crooked," Birch said. "No. Usually it's crooked. I practiced." "You practiced ironing?" "I practiced." Birch stared at the perfectly pressed shirt for a moment. "Okay," he said. "But I kind of liked the crease." They went in anyway. The hearing was 40 minutes. Judge Lowell asked fewer questions this time. She had, in Eli's opinion, made her decision before she sat down. The file was thorough. Marion had been thorough. And the judge had been in this room long enough to know when she'd seen it 5 months ago what she was looking at. She had known. She signed the order. Permanent guardianship granted. Eli Merritt guardian. Birch, whose last name they'd been talking about slowly in the way that important conversations happened between people who had time for them now. Permanent. For real. On paper. The way it had been true in every other way for a long time. Outside the courthouse on the steps, Savannah December, which was mild and gray-green and smelled like the river, the live oaks still draped in their moss, the light low and soft. Birch sat on the step below Eli, said nothing for a minute. Then, "So I'm yours now." "You were always mine," Eli said. "Now it's just official." "Is there a difference?" "For the judge." "Not for us." "No," Eli said. "Not for us." Birch looked at the street, at the pigeons doing their perpetual circuit of the sidewalk, at the live oak across the way dropping a slow rain of small dead leaves onto the parked cars. "Eli." "Yeah?" "What happens when you don't know what you're doing?" A pause. "You learn, while you're doing it. What if you mess up? You say so and you fix it. What if you can't fix it?" Eli thought about that. About an old woman with 14 notebooks and 30 years of letters that never arrived, and a dollar bill with a hidden message. "You keep going anyway," he said, "and you make sure the next thing you do is better." Birch thought about this. "That seems hard," he said. "It is." "But you do it." "Yeah, okay." He stood up, dusted off his nice pants. "Can we get the bread from Jones Street again?" Eli stood. "Yeah, we can get the bread. I want my own half this time." "You can have your own half." "I know. I just wanted to say it." He started down the steps. "And Eli." "Yeah. You can have your half too." He paused without turning around. "You don't have to give it to me. You can just have it." Eli looked at the back of his head, the wild hair, the second-hand coat that fit a little better now than it had in June, because he'd grown, the walk of a kid who had stopped counting exits a long time ago and wasn't going to start again. "Yeah," Eli said. "Yeah, you'll keep it, or yeah, you heard me." "Both." Birch nodded, started walking. Eli followed. The dollar bill lives now in a small frame on the wall of his office at the center. Thayer had suggested it. Francis had agreed it was right. Eli had resisted for about a week, and then accepted that they were both correct. Simple frame, the bill inside old and worn and soft at the creases, and below it in the same careful, small handwriting that Eli had come to know better than most people's voices, a line from Notebook 7. The most important stories are the ones people think don't matter enough to tell. Tell them anyway, every time, especially then. Below that smaller still, Eli's addition. His handwriting, not hers, but hers in everything that mattered, and give away the bigger half. Some mornings early before anyone else arrives, Eli stands in the doorway of his office and looks at the frame. He thinks about a woman he never met who spent 14 years writing his name in composition books. He thinks about a man named Daniel who made people feel steadied just by being in the room and never got the chance to teach his son how. He thinks about Birch, who is probably at this moment either sleeping or arguing with Petra about something that is technically important. He thinks about a dollar bill that traveled from an old woman's careful hand to a will-reading table, to a shirt pocket, to a storage room in the West Georgia woods, and back again, doing more work along the way than most things 10 times its value. And then the kids start arriving. They come in ones and twos and small groups, kids with the same eyes. Birch had the same way of reading a room, the same learned wariness about whether this place would still be here tomorrow. Kids who have been moved so many times that unpacking feels like a risk. They come in, and Eli is there, same as always, every morning, with the bigger half.